The sun was setting as the blue sedan pulled into the busy interstate rest stop. The parking lot was filled with travelers stretching their legs, families with children running around, and truck drivers taking their required breaks. No one paid attention to the car that parked near the edge of the lot, away from the main building. 15-year-old Amara sat quietly in the back seat, her eyes darting around, looking for anyone who might notice that something wasn't right. She wore a plain gray hoodie that was too big for her slim frame, her dark curly hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. 3 days ago, she had been in her bedroom, excited about messages from what she thought was a legitimate modeling agency that had found her photos online. "Just think about it," the older man in the passenger seat said, turning around to look at her with a smile that never reached his eyes. "By this time next week, you'll be in a Miami photo shoot, making more money than you've ever seen." He was always the one who talked, who tried to sound friendly. The driver rarely spoke at all, which scared her even more. Amara nodded, not making eye contact. She'd stopped believing their promises the first night, when they'd taken her phone for security reasons. Then her ID and the small amount of cash she had brought. Each time they stopped, one of them stayed with her, never leaving her alone. The driver turned off the engine and checked his watch. "Need to refuel and grab some food. You want anything?" he asked the other man, not bothering to include Amara in the question. "Yeah, get me whatever." "And some water," the talkative one replied. "We'll be here," he added with a meaningful glance toward Amara. As the driver walked away, Amara watched families moving between their cars and the rest stop building. A mother holding a toddler's hand. An elderly couple walking their small dog on the grass area. A group of teenagers laughing together by the vending machines. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that just yards away, a girl was silently screaming for help. She remembered the conversation she'd had with her best friend just a month ago when they'd watched a video their school counselor had shared during assembly. "It's important you know this," the counselor had said. "If you're ever in a situation where you can't speak freely, where someone might be watching or listening, there's a hand signal you can use." At the time, Amara had thought it was interesting, but never imagined she would need it. Now that simple gesture was the only hope she had left. The man beside her was scrolling through his phone, occasionally typing something. Amara knew they were meeting people in Miami, people who were paying for her. She had overheard enough of their conversations to understand what modeling really meant in their world. She felt sick to her stomach. Her parents must be frantic by now. She had left a note saying she was going to a friend's house for the weekend, thinking she'd be back before they even noticed the lie. Now she wondered if she'd ever see them again. Through the window, she noticed a man in a faded green t-shirt walking to his truck. There was something about the way he moved, purposeful, alert, that caught her attention. He had short cropped hair and stood very straight. Military, she thought instantly, remembering her uncle who had served. The man in the passenger seat yawned and stretched. "We'll be back on the road in 5 minutes. It's another 4 hours to the next stop." Amara's heart raced. This might be her only chance. The rest stop was busy enough that people were around, but not so crowded that she couldn't be seen. The military-looking man was loading something into his truck, just 3 parking spaces away. She glanced at her captor. His attention had returned to his phone, probably messaging whoever they were meeting. Slowly, carefully, Amara raised her hand to the window, making a fist with her thumb tucked inside, then closing her fingers over it, the universal distress signal she had learned. The military man didn't look her way at first. She kept her hand steady, fighting back tears, willing him to turn around. "Please look," she thought desperately. "Please see me." And then, as if hearing her silent plea, he turned. The Marine walked across the rest stop parking lot, sipping his black coffee. His name tag read Rodriguez, and his posture remained straight despite having driven for 6 hours straight. It was a habit from 8 years of military service. 3 tours overseas had taught him to stay alert even in seemingly safe places. He was on his way to see his folks for the first time in 14 months. His mom had promised to cook all his favorites, rice with pigeon peas, slow-roasted pork, and the sweet plantains nobody made quite like her. The thought made him smile as he tossed his empty cup into a trash can. The afternoon sun felt good on his face. He stretched his back, feeling the familiar tightness from too many hours behind the wheel. This rest stop was bigger than most, a modern building with clean restrooms, several fast food options, and plenty of parking. Families with children, truckers catching naps, and road-weary travelers mingled in the busy lot. Rodriguez was nearly at his pickup truck when something caught his eye: movement in a blue sedan parked near the edge of the lot. Something about it didn't feel right. Most people at rest stops were either walking to the building or stretching outside their vehicles. But this car had someone sitting in the back seat, a young girl who seemed to be making an unusual hand gesture. He slowed his pace, pretending to check his phone while watching from the corner of his eye. The gesture was deliberate, a fist with the thumb tucked inside, then fingers closing over it. Last month, during a routine briefing on base, they'd covered civilian safety awareness, including recognition of the universal distress signal that had spread widely on social media during the pandemic. It was designed to silently alert others to domestic abuse or trafficking situations. Rodriguez felt his heart rate quicken, but his face remained calm. Military training had taught him that rushing into unknown situations could make things worse. He needed to assess the threat level first. He casually changed direction, walking past the sedan as if heading toward the vending machines. Now he could see the girl more clearly. She couldn't be more than 16, with dark curly hair and frightened eyes. A man sat in the front passenger seat, scrolling through his phone, occasionally glancing back at her. When Rodriguez passed, the girl's eyes met his for just a split second before looking down. That brief connection told him everything he needed to know. The fear was real. He continued walking, his mind working through options. Direct confrontation could be dangerous. If these were traffickers, they might be armed and would certainly be desperate if cornered. The girl could be hurt in any escalation. Rodriguez reached the building and positioned himself by a window where he could keep an eye on the blue sedan while pulling out his phone. He dialed 911, keeping his voice low and steady. "I need to report a possible human trafficking situation at the Highway 40 rest stop, eastbound side," he said when the dispatcher answered. "There's a young girl in a blue sedan making the distress hand signal that indicates she needs help." "Can you describe the vehicle more specifically, sir?" the dispatcher asked. "Blue four-door sedan, looks like a Toyota Camry, around 5 years old. Georgia plates." He recited the license plate number, grateful for his training in noticing such details. "Parked in the northeast corner of the lot. One man visible in the passenger seat, possibly another coming back from the building soon." As he spoke, Rodriguez noticed another man walking back toward the sedan carrying drinks and a bag of food. This one moved with purpose, scanning the parking lot as he walked. The way he checked his surroundings reminded Rodriguez of security personnel in conflict zones, always watching for threats. "Ma'am, there's a second individual returning to the vehicle now," he said quietly. "I believe they may be preparing to leave soon." "We have officers about 5 minutes out," the dispatcher replied. "Can you safely remain in visual contact with the vehicle without approaching or alerting the suspects?" Rodriguez thought quickly. His truck was parked in a spot that would allow him to block the sedan if necessary. "Yes, I can maintain surveillance. I'm a Marine recently back from deployment. I can handle this until officers arrive." He ended the call and walked back toward his truck, every sense heightened. The girl was still watching him through the window, her eyes now filled with something he hadn't seen before: hope. Rodriguez kept his movements casual as he walked back to his truck. Years of military training had taught him that looking nervous or hurried could tip off the men watching the girl. He pulled out his phone again, pretending to take a call while positioning himself where he could keep an eye on the blue sedan. The second man had reached the car now, handing drinks and a bag of food through the window to his partner. They spoke briefly, their body language tense but controlled. Both men constantly scanned the parking lot, a behavior Rodriguez recognized from his security training. They were checking for threats, for anyone paying too much attention. He looked away when their eyes moved in his direction, focusing on his phone screen while still keeping them in his peripheral vision. The girl in the back seat was trying to appear calm, but Rodriguez could see how stiffly she sat, how her hands trembled slightly as she accepted a drink from the front seat. From his new position, he could see inside the car better. No visible weapons, but the men had the hardened look of people accustomed to violence. The driver walked around to the gas cap and began refueling the car. 5 minutes, maybe less, before they would be ready to leave. The 911 dispatcher had promised help was coming, but highway patrol could still be minutes away. Rodriguez needed to delay them somehow without raising suspicion. He casually walked toward the sedan, angling himself as if heading to the rest stop building. As he passed near the car, he deliberately made eye contact with the girl again, giving her the slightest nod, just enough to let her know he understood that help was coming. The hope in her eyes almost broke his composure. Behind that hope was terror and exhaustion. How long had she been with these men? Where were they taking her? The questions fueled his determination to keep her safe until police arrived. The passenger side man narrowed his eyes as Rodriguez walked past, suddenly alert to his presence. Rodriguez kept his face neutral, even nodding politely as if acknowledging a fellow traveler before continuing toward the building. Once inside, he positioned himself by the window again, pulling out his phone to update the dispatcher. "They're refueling the car now," he said quietly. "2 men, no visible weapons, but they're alert and suspicious. The girl looks frightened but physically okay. They'll be ready to leave in minutes." "Officers are 3 minutes out," the dispatcher replied. "They're approaching without sirens. Can you give us any additional details about the suspects?" Rodriguez described both men: height, build, clothing, distinguishing features like the driver's distinctive tattoo on his forearm. Details mattered in situations like this. "Sir, the officers are asking if you can safely delay the suspects from leaving without endangering yourself or the girl." Rodriguez thought quickly. His truck was parked where he could potentially block their exit, but that would immediately alert them that something was wrong. If they were armed, the situation could escalate dangerously. "I have another idea," he said. He walked quickly to the help desk inside the rest stop building where a middle-aged woman was answering a traveler's question about local hotels. When she was free, Rodriguez approached. "Excuse me, ma'am. This is going to sound strange, but I need to make an announcement about a blue Toyota Camry with Georgia plates parked outside. It's a security situation." The woman looked skeptical until Rodriguez quietly explained he was working with police regarding a possible abduction. Her expression changed immediately. "Use this," she said, handing him a microphone. Rodriguez took a breath and pressed the button. His voice echoed throughout the rest area. "Attention, the owner of the blue Toyota Camry with Georgia license plate number THX4873, your vehicle is blocking access to the maintenance area. Please move your vehicle immediately or it will be towed." The 2 police cars entered the rest area from different directions, moving slowly without lights or sirens. Rodriguez watched from inside the building as they strategically positioned themselves, one near the exit and another in a spot that gave officers a clear view of the blue sedan. Outside, the driver of the sedan was still looking around, confused about the announcement. His partner had stepped out of the car and was scanning the parking lot with increasing suspicion. Rodriguez noticed the girl shifting nervously in the back seat, her eyes darting between the approaching police cars and the men who held her captive. "They're getting spooked," Rodriguez told the dispatcher, who was still on the line. "The officers need to move in now." "They're coordinating their approach," the dispatcher replied. "Stay where you are, sir. You've done everything right." But Rodriguez couldn't just watch. He left the building, walking casually toward his truck, which was parked just 2 spaces away from the sedan. If the men tried to flee with the girl before police could reach them, he was prepared to use his vehicle to block their escape. The driver had finished refueling and was reaching for his wallet to pay at the pump. His partner leaned against the car, lighting a cigarette, his eyes constantly moving across the parking lot. When his gaze landed on one of the unmarked police cars, his posture changed instantly. "Dude, we got a problem," he said to the driver, voice low but urgent. "Cops." The driver looked up, spotted the police car, and quickly moved toward the driver's door. Rodriguez watched the plainclothes officers emerge from their vehicles, 2 men and a woman, their badges visible on chains around their necks. They moved with calm purpose, spreading out to approach from different angles. The uniformed highway patrol officer stayed by his vehicle, one hand on his radio as he coordinated the response. Nobody had drawn weapons yet, but the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The driver jumped into the car and turned the key. The engine roared to life. His partner rushed to the passenger side, throwing his cigarette to the ground. "Police, turn off the vehicle," one of the plainclothes officers shouted, approaching with his hand near his holster. Time seemed to slow down. Rodriguez could see the girl's face through the back window, her eyes wide with fear and hope. The driver gunned the engine, but his path was blocked by one of the police cars. The female officer approached the driver's side window. "Turn off the engine now," she commanded, her voice firm but controlled. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed like the driver might try to ram the police car. His partner was yelling something at him that Rodriguez couldn't hear. Then, slowly, the driver raised his hands and turned off the engine. "Exit the vehicle with your hands where we can see them," the female officer ordered, while her colleagues moved to cover the passenger side and rear of the car. The two men complied, stepping out with their hands raised. In seconds, they were being handcuffed and guided to separate police cars. The third officer approached the back door and opened it gently. "You're safe now," he told the girl. "It's going to be okay." She practically fell into his arms, her body shaking with silent sobs. Rodriguez stayed by his truck, watching as the officers skillfully managed the scene. One was talking softly to the girl, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Another was reading rights to the two handcuffed men. The highway patrol officer was setting up orange cones to direct traffic away from the area, which had now become an active crime scene. The rest stop manager approached Rodriguez. "You did good," she said, handing him a fresh coffee. "Real good." He accepted the coffee with a nod, his eyes still on the girl. She was sitting in the back of a police car now, talking to the female officer. For the first time since he'd spotted her, her shoulders weren't hunched with fear. She looked up and saw him watching. Their eyes met across the parking lot, and she raised her hand in a small wave. Rodriguez waved back, a lump forming in his throat. He wasn't due at his parents' house until tomorrow. His road trip could wait a few hours while he gave his statement to police. Some things were more important than being on time for dinner, even his mom's cooking. The rest stop parking lot had transformed into an organized chaos of police activity. Blue and red lights flashed silently from the patrol car, deliberately kept quiet to avoid drawing too much attention from other travelers. Officers had set up a perimeter around the blue sedan, which was now being processed as evidence. Rodriguez sat in the front seat of an unmarked police car, a notepad in his lap as he carefully wrote down everything he could remember, from the moment he first noticed the girl's hand signal to the final moments of the arrest. The female detective sitting beside him nodded as he spoke, occasionally asking questions to clarify details. "So you recognized the distress signal from a training session?" she asked, her pen hovering over her own notebook. "Yes, ma'am. We had a briefing about human trafficking awareness last month on base. They showed us videos of the signal and told us it was being taught to potential victims through social media and school programs." The detective nodded. "That signal has helped rescue at least 15 people in our state alone this year. Most folks wouldn't have noticed it or would have ignored it if they did." Rodriguez glanced across the parking lot to where the girl sat in another police car, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm day. A female officer was sitting with her, and a woman in civilian clothes who had been introduced as a victim advocate was crouched by the open door, speaking softly to her. "How's she doing?" he asked. The detective followed his gaze. "As well as can be expected. She says her name is Amara, 15 years old. Been missing from her home in Alabama for 3 days. She shook her head. Parents reported her missing right away, but these guys moved her across state lines quickly. They were headed to Florida." Rodriguez felt his jaw tighten. "They told her she was going to be a model, didn't they?" The detective raised an eyebrow. "How'd you know?" "It's a common tactic. They'd find girls on social media, compliment their looks, offer modeling contracts or auditions. Get them to meet somewhere, and then—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Through the windshield, Rodriguez watched as another police car arrived. A tall black man and a woman with the same curly hair as Amara practically jumped out before the car had fully stopped. The woman's hand was over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Her parents?" Rodriguez asked. The detective nodded. "We called them as soon as we confirmed her identity. They drove straight here from Montgomery." Amara looked up as her parents approached. For a split second, she seemed frozen in place. Then she was scrambling out of the police car, the blanket falling from her shoulders as she ran toward them. The reunion happened in the middle of the parking lot, 3 people holding onto each other as if they might never let go again. Amara's mother was covering her face with kisses while her father enveloped them both in his arms, his shoulders shaking. Rodriguez felt something catch in his throat watching them. It was moments like this that reminded him why he served, why protecting others mattered so much. The 2 men who had taken Amara were now being transported to the county jail. One had been identified as a known trafficker with outstanding warrants in 3 states. The other had no record, but his phone contained evidence that would likely send him to prison for a very long time. "We're going to need you to come to the station to make a formal statement," the detective told Rodriguez, "and you'll probably need to testify if this goes to trial." "Whatever it takes," he replied without hesitation. The detective smiled at him. Most people would have kept walking, too afraid to get involved or too busy with their own lives. Rodriguez shrugged. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," she said firmly, "not what anyone would do. What you did, it saved her life." Across the parking lot, Amara was now sitting with her parents at a picnic table, the victim advocate explaining what would happen next. As if feeling his gaze, Amara looked up and made eye contact with Rodriguez. She whispered something to her parents, who both turned to look at him. Her father stood up and began walking in his direction, determination in every step. Rodriguez got out of the police car to meet him, unsure what to expect. The man stopped in front of him, eyes red from crying but his gaze steady. Without a word, he extended his hand. Rodriguez took it and found himself pulled into a fierce hug. "Thank you," Amara's father whispered, his voice breaking. "Thank you for seeing my baby girl when no one else did." 3 weeks had passed since that day at the rest stop. Rodriguez sat in the back of the county courthouse, watching as Amara walked confidently to the witness stand. She looked different now, her curly hair styled neatly, wearing a simple blue dress and small pearl earrings that caught the light when she moved her head. Her parents sat in the front row, holding hands tightly as their daughter prepared to testify. The preliminary hearing was closed to the public due to Amara's age, but Rodriguez had been allowed to attend as a witness in the case. The district attorney had told him his testimony would be crucial, especially since he had been the first to recognize the danger Amara was in. As Amara raised her right hand to be sworn in, her eyes briefly met Rodriguez's across the courtroom. She gave him a small nod of recognition, her face solemn but no longer carrying that haunted look he'd seen at the rest stop. "Please state your name for the record," the judge instructed. "Amara Lynn Taylor," she replied, her voice clear despite the pressure of the moment. Rodriguez listened as she carefully described how she had been contacted through social media by someone claiming to be a talent scout, how flattering messages had gradually led to an invitation to meet for a supposed photo shoot, how quickly the situation had changed once she was in their car. "And how did you know to use the hand signal that ultimately led to your rescue?" the prosecutor asked. "My school counselor showed us a video about it during an assembly," Amara explained. "She said it was something we should all know, just in case. I never thought I'd actually need to use it." When it was Rodriguez's turn to testify, he described noticing Amara in the back seat of the car, recognizing the hand signal, and contacting authorities. The defense attorneys tried to challenge his observations, suggesting he might have misinterpreted what he saw, but Rodriguez remained calm and firm in his account. "I know what I saw," he stated simply. "I've been trained to notice details most people miss." She was asking for help the only way she could. After the hearing, which resulted in the case proceeding to trial, Rodriguez found himself in the courthouse hallway surrounded by the investigation team. The lead detective was explaining that phones seized from the 2 men had led to the identification of a larger trafficking network operating across the southeast. "We've identified at least 7 other potential victims," she said, keeping her voice low. 2 have already been rescued, and we're working on locating the others. "Will they have to testify too?" Rodriguez asked, thinking of how difficult it had been for Amara to recount her experience. "Maybe not. The evidence from the phones and financial records is strong. We're hoping to get plea deals that spare the victims from having to appear in court." As they spoke, Amara and her parents emerged from a conference room with the prosecutor. Her father spotted Rodriguez and guided his family over. "We're heading home now," he said, extending his hand. "But we wanted to thank you again." Rodriguez shook his hand. "How are you doing?" he asked Amara directly. A small smile appeared on her face. "Better. I'm seeing a counselor twice a week, and I'm helping make a video for my school about how to spot traffickers online." Her mother placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "She's turning this terrible experience into something positive. The video will be shared with schools across the state." "That's brave," Rodriguez said, impressed by her resilience. Amara shrugged slightly. "If it helps even one person avoid what happened to me, it's worth it." She hesitated, then added, "My counselor says I need to find meaning in what happened to help me heal." She's also started a support group for other girls, her father added proudly. Girls who've been through similar situations or who just need a safe place to talk about the pressures they face online. As they prepared to leave, Amara surprised everyone by giving Rodriguez a quick hug. "My dad says you were just doing your duty," she said quietly. "But to me, you're a hero. I won't forget what you did." Rodriguez watched them walk away, feeling a mix of emotions. He had seen terrible things during his tours overseas, but somehow this stateside rescue had affected him more deeply than he'd expected. That night, he called his commanding officer to ask about the human trafficking awareness training they'd received. "I was wondering," he said, "if we could expand that training to include all personnel on base, and maybe take it to local schools too." The answer came without hesitation. "After what you did? Absolutely. Let's make it happen." 6 months later, Rodriguez stood in the back of a crowded high school auditorium, watching as hundreds of teenagers listened to Amara tell her story. Her voice was stronger now, more confident than it had been in the courtroom. She stood tall at the podium, no longer the frightened girl he had spotted through a car window at a highway rest stop. "I'm not sharing my story to scare you," she told the silent audience. "I'm sharing it because knowledge is power. Because the hand signal I learned in a school assembly just like this one saved my life." On the screen behind her, a simple video demonstrated the universal distress signal, a hand raised with the thumb tucked into the palm, then the fingers folding down over it. The students watched intently, many practicing the motion themselves. When Amara finished speaking, the applause was thunderous. Rodriguez clapped too, pride swelling in his chest at how far she had come. This was her 4th school presentation this month, part of a statewide education program that had developed after her rescue. The 2 men who had taken her were now serving long prison sentences. Their phones and computers had provided evidence that led to the arrest of 6 more traffickers across 3 states and the rescue of 12 other young people. The case had made national news, bringing renewed attention to the dangers of trafficking and the importance of public awareness. As the assembly ended and students filed out, many stopping to speak with Amara, Rodriguez checked his watch. He needed to get back to base soon, but he wanted to congratulate her first. He found her surrounded by a small group of students and teachers, patiently answering questions and handing out wallet-sized cards printed with information about trafficking warning signs and the hand signal. She spotted him over the shoulder of a concerned teacher and excused herself. "You made it," she said, giving him a quick hug. "I wasn't sure if you'd be able to come with your training schedule." "Wouldn't have missed it," he replied honestly. "That was quite a speech." She grinned, looking more like a typical teenager than he ever seen her. "I was so nervous at first, but now it feels, I don't know, important. Like this terrible thing that happened has a purpose now." Her parents joined them, greeting Rodriguez warmly. In the months since the rescue, they had become something like friends. He had been to their home for dinner twice, and Amara's father had even come to speak at a training session Rodriguez had organized on base. "The governor's office called this morning," Amara's mother said, her eyes shining with pride. "They want to present Amara with a Civilian Bravery Award at a ceremony next month. And they want you there too." Amara added quickly, looking at Rodriguez. "They're giving you some kind of commendation." Rodriguez shook his head. "I was just in the right place. At the right time and actually paying attention," Amara's father finished for him. "Unlike the 50 other people who walked past my daughter that day and didn't notice a thing." A teacher approached them, apologetically explaining that a news crew had arrived to interview Amara about the new school awareness program. As she walked away with her parents, she turned back to Rodriguez. "I'm not the only one making a difference because of what happened," she called. "You've trained over 500 people now, right?" Rodriguez nodded. The trafficking awareness program he had started on base had expanded to include other military installations and local law enforcement agencies. Just last week, he'd received a call from a police officer in Tennessee who had successfully rescued a teenage boy after recognizing the hand signal, an officer who had attended one of Rodriguez's training sessions. Outside the school, Rodriguez paused beside his truck, looking up at the clear blue sky. His commanding officer had hinted about a promotion coming his way, partly due to his community outreach work. The recognition was nice, but it wasn't why he did it. He thought about how easily things could have gone differently that day. If he had been looking at his phone while walking to his truck, if he hadn't attended that awareness briefing, if Amara hadn't learned that signal. So many small moments that added up to a life saved, and then many more lives saved as the ripples spread outward. As he drove back to base, Rodriguez turned on the radio to hear a news announcer mentioning a nationwide campaign being launched to teach the distress signal in all public schools. He smiled. Sometimes the smallest actions, a hand signal, a moment of attention, could change everything. Not just for one person, but for many. All it took was someone willing to notice and then do something about what they saw.